A Spooky Tale for Halloween by Julie Fern. Stanley and Betty. Purple-faced Stanley talked incessantly. I had to ask him to be quiet during the oath bit. History in the making. I didn't actually care, but at least I wasn't home alone. The reds and golds of the coronation swam as we watched, guzzling Prosecco, Malbec, and variety sandwiches from M&S. The spring sun flowed through the nets and created a shimmery haze. Cocooned in Betty's world of china and brass, I felt nostalgic for the comfort of family and bygone days. Afterwards, I staggered home along the sun-blanched street of bungalows as Union Jacks snapped in the wind. A remark of Stanley's had unsettled me, but what's the point of challenging strangers? I had no plans to hook up with him and Betty, after all. I had to pass Stanley and Betty's bungalow every day to walk my dog. They lived next to one another and were constantly popping in and out of each other's houses. I thought it was sweet and secretly envied them. No one popped out of my house these days, because after my last accident, supine in bed with a leg encased in purple plaster, I decided to give up drinking. That resulted in excruciating hangovers and unexplained bruises. The weird group celebrations of being able to take your drink disturbed me. Cooey! Betty sprang from her doorway with the white pensioner wall handles and limped up the drive to greet me and Molly. That was fun the other day. A smile exposed her yellow teeth, and she eagerly awaited a positive reply. I answered almost truthfully, yes, it was enjoyable. Thanks for inviting me. Would Molly like some biscuits? Before I could answer, she spun back to get some. Molly wagged her tail and snuffled into Betty's cream slacks after gobbling the biscuits. Then Stanley slipped from behind his hedge and bent to pat Molly. Hello, boy. She's a girl. Her name's Molly. I hoped I didn't sound harsh. Stanley breathed fumes into Molly's face and she backed away. We should do it again, Betty called from her gate as I tugged Molly from the driveway. Yes, I said, not meaning it. Summer arrived early. The open blue sky blasted the sun down daily. Heat frizzled the earth before the leaves opened their skirts, and the young grass shrank back. My birthday was soon, and its approach oppressed me. 2 friends would join me on the day, but that was tomorrow. Today, the sun bounced on my patio and the bees wobbled on the aromatic lavender. Oh, fuck it. I didn't want to be alone on this glorious day. Stanley opened his door before I knocked. His face looked more navy than purple in the dark of the doorway. I tugged at Molly's lead and said, Molly would like you and Betty to come for a drink in our garden. I could feel the colour creep over my face. When my friend left early on my birthday, I phoned Stanley, effervescent with wine and tamped down senses. We agreed to meet up soon for another drink and snacks affair. Why not, I thought, as I poured myself another wine that glinted in the crystal glass. Sitting on Betty's floral sofa, my bare toes dug into her fluffy rug, I felt happy. Stanley asked if I liked the Eagles. Yes, of course, it was true. I was young in the 1970s. What kind of music do you like? Betty asked me, displaying her perfect yellow teeth and a rictus smile. I like all types. My taste's eclectic. But who's your favourite singer? I don't do favourites. Betty shuffled on her armchair. I like Fleetwood Mac. Pretty impressive for 80, I thought. She wanted to pin me down, so I said, Van Morrison's one of my favourite singers. The Eagles are the best group in the world, said Stanley, and got up to play the best of the Eagles. He bent over the CD player with his hairy arms and said, she didn't know who Fleetwood Mac was until I told her. Betty smiled at me. My husband used to like James Last. I nodded and swigged my Prosecco as Molly snoozed by my feet. And so it went on, dropping in and out for a drink and a chat about Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles. Call me clumsy. Another fall grounded me, a broken ankle this time. Stanley and Betty leapt at the chance to walk Molly daily. They were kind and there was no one else. Unless I paid some dog walker who would tether Molly to a large group of dogs and drag them through the park in a snarling pack that parents and children would shrink from. Stanley liked tea time walks best and began bringing 2 bottles of wine for a cheeky post-walk drink. Red for him, white for me and Betty, who only ever drank 1 small glass as she sat on my sofa, gazing at Stanley as he rambled about the Eagles. Then Stanley began to bring a bottle of red after the morning walks. With his boyish smile, he insisted that the sun was past the yardarm. Betty sipped gingerly, and I said, not for me, thanks. He would ask, after 3/4 of the bottle had slid down his throat, is it okay if I play Hotel California? He'd rifled my music collection on his first visit and pounced on his 2 favourites. I'd like to have a nap soon. I glanced at Betty, who was raptured in his presence. That evening, they arrived with the DVD and more bottles. We can all watch a film, Betty said brightly, as she settled into the sofa. As Stanley bent to slap the DVD into the black, gaping tray, he said, this is a great film at the end. But I stopped him. Don't spoil it for us, Stanley. Betty hasn't seen it and I've forgotten. But Stanley stood back from the player, one hand on his jutting hip, the other fidgeting for something not there. At the end, he began. I looked at Betty for support, but she gazed adoringly at Stanley. He's revealed the film's end and added more detail. So, Stanley suggested, we listen to the Eagles. I've got loads of music, Stanley, I said. Why don't you choose something different? He stumbled towards the shelf and noisily pulled CDs in and out to inspect them. Never heard of them, he said now and then. Or them. He clattered through my collection. Betty sat silently, waiting for Stanley to choose the music, just like her dead husband had. Eventually, he yanked something out and turned towards me. What's this weird stuff then? It's a collection of alternative country. You know, the Hanson family and... Stanley stared hard at me. Behind him, the evening sun illuminated the silhouette. Behind him, the evening sun illuminated his silhouette through the French doors. Stanley's features were obscured, and his face was a darkened blur. The long black hairs on his lower arms were raised in curls, with dust motes floating off like tiny fires. He resembled the devil. His claw hands unfurled at his sides. I didn't want to hear any more Eagles or Fleetwood Mac. I didn't want to get pissed with an alcoholic who leached friendship, who filled my glass to overflowing and shrugged when I'd mentioned after one of their visits I'd fallen over and banged my head on the skirting board, which could have been so much worse, say like Sandy Denny falling downstairs drunk and killing herself. Could have snapped my neck, or like Marian Faithfull, crashing down drunk and breaking her jaw on the floor of a New York apartment. I needed to escape from losers, needing to start swigging early and continue until late, until insensate. Who saw it as a bit of fun, something not for weaklings. I wanted to push him out of my door, to fall, crack his skull wide open, and pour out thick red blood like my hate for him at that moment. I glanced to check for cloven hooves. He was in his beige moccasin slippers. As I stared at Stanley, he came back into view. His purple face emerged from the backlight. His hands trembled as those of alcoholics do. I saw his weakness and felt mine. I needed to run away, but I couldn't, not with my injury. Stanley, I said, shut up and have another drink.